Good afternoon. I'm Chris Kershner, Executive Vice President for the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm here today with United States Senator Rob Portman to talk directly to our members and the small business community about the impact of the recently passed CARES Act. This is the major federal stimulus bill that passed recently in Washington, D.C. I'm excited to have U.S. Senator Rob Portman here. U.S. Senator Rob Portman's coming to us from his farm outside of Oregonia, Ohio. He was one of the Republican negotiators at the table negotiating this package on behalf of the small business community. And we're excited to have him here today to explain some of the impacts on our businesses in the greater Dayton region. Senator Portman, thank you for being here.
Chris, thank you so much for having me on. And importantly, thanks to the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce, because you guys have done a good job of getting information out to your members. This is an example of that, and also getting information to me and continuing to be a good resource for us to figure out how do we do something in Washington that's actually going to be beneficial to keeping people at work, helping small businesses keep the doors open. This legislation is an attempt to do that. It's not perfect, but I do think it's going to help. And I've talked to a lot of small business owners around Ohio about that, both before we passed the legislation and in the aftermath of it. One of the challenges we face right now is just implementation, getting it up and going. But we'll talk a little about that and what some of the programs are that small businesses in the Dayton area might want to take advantage of.
Oh, that'd be great. Information is key right now, so we're trying to get this information out as quickly to the business community as we can, and you are a key resource in that, so we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. First question, just to get things kicked off for you. On March 27th, the largest stimulus package in United States history was passed by the Senate and the House and signed into law by the President of the United States. As we mentioned earlier, you were one of the Republican negotiators at the table representing the business community. Small businesses are the lifeblood of the economy and are severely hurting because of the COVID-19. These small businesses are our neighbors, they're our friends, and they're part of our communities. As a small business owner yourself, you have always been a champion for the business community. Can you summarize the support for small businesses that you made sure was included in the recently passed CARES Act?
Chris, there are a number of provisions that help small businesses, but the one that's most focused and targeted on the businesses here in Ohio that will help the most, in my view, is a new loan program that is being run through the SBA, being administered through banks, and not through the federal government, but through your banking relationship, which I think is really key. And it's called the 7A program expanded. And what that means is that small businesses under 500 employees, so to me, that's not just small business, to me, that's mid-sized businesses and small businesses are able to apply. If they have a banking relationship with a financial institution that is already a SBA approved lender, it will go more quickly. But that's not required. Eventually, every FDIC insured bank will be able to participate. So check with your banker right away to see whether your bank can help you right now get this program going. I'm told that by Friday this week, they expect to have the applications out from the federal government to the banks and out to individuals. So I would now go to your bank and line up the information that they can provide you up front. And then as of Friday, hopefully you'll be able to get a formal application and get started on it. It's a pretty simple program in many respects because the federal government's going to step in and provide 100% guarantee, which, as you know, is higher than usual with regard to these SBA programs. So the bank has, got 100% backing from the federal government. Second, it's a loan that in effect converts into a grant if it's used for certain purposes. One purpose is payroll. And the idea of this legislation, more than anything else, is to say to the small business community out there, and as Chris says, I'm in small business, talking to a lot of friends who are in small business, helping them to just keep as many employees as they possibly can. You'll be able to use these loans to be able to pay payroll, and then that loan will be forgiven for that purpose. It can also be used for utilities. It can also be used for mortgage payments or rent. These are all, again, expenses that many of our small businesses in Ohio are incurring right now without any significant revenue coming in. It's very difficult for them. So this is sort of a rescue package to get through this time period. The limitation is $10 million per business, or 2.5 times what your payroll was the most recent month, which for most will be in February. They provide that information. That shouldn't be a problem for a lot of our businesses in Ohio, because the 10 million cap is more than they need right now, but they need the money to be able to keep the doors open. So please try to take advantage of this program. And again, I would suggest first going to your bank. There's also some legislation that was already passed as part of the disaster declaration earlier, emergency declaration, that does provide some additional SBA funding, including a $10,000 loan under the SBA that ultimately would not have to be paid back if used as an emergency bridge loan. So check that out too with SBA. You can go on SBA.com and look at that. I was on with Gil Goldberg last night, who's the head of the Cleveland office for SBA. He has said that the SBA is open for business, so contact them if you want to look at some other alternatives. But I think this 7A program, the new one in the CARES Act, will be the most helpful. There's also a number of other provisions in there for funding through the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which is a Treasury Fed lending facility that is going to be new. That's for all businesses of any size, and some may look at that as well. That will be particularly helpful to companies that are looking for a relatively low interest loan and cannot get a commercial loan because of the situation they're in. So this will really be kind of back up the system. And by the way, that funding will be available to companies of every size, but including small businesses and including defense contractors.
Oh, that's great. And you know how important defense contractors are for the Dayton region. It's has such a huge economic impact on our area. So helping support those contractors is a big help. As you know, the defense contractors do represent a significant number of small businesses. And some of those contracts are already in process, but may be on hold now because of the coronavirus. Is there additional consideration being given to the Department of Defense to support the defense contracting community during this time?
There is. I mentioned the SBA program, which they would be eligible for, but also there's a special provision under what's called the Exchange Stabilization Fund and the ability for the Fed to be able to provide liquidity to companies right now. There is $17 billion set aside for national security firms, in other words, companies that are important to our nation's national security. This decision will be made by the Department of Defense, as I understand it. So companies need to be in touch with DOD to determine whether they would be eligible. And although $17 billion is a lot of money, you might ask, well, spread around the country, is that enough? But this is a Fed facility. In other words, it takes some money from Treasury, which is the $17 billion, and then it leverages that with the Federal Reserve's ability to provide much more liquidity. It's about a 10-to-1 ratio. So this is really a $170 billion program for firms involved with our national security. So to the extent the 7A program doesn't work for you because you're over 500 employees, or to the extent it doesn't work for you for other reasons, or you want to also look at a loan from this special program for national security, I would recommend you look at that as well. Treasury, the Fed, and the Department of Defense will all be involved in that.
Oh, that's great advice for our small businesses and for our defense community. Thank you very much. Shifting gears a little bit to nonprofits. There was relief included in the CARES Act for the nonprofit community. However, there's more that will need to be done as community nonprofits rely on corporate support and patron support for sustainability. As both corporate philanthropy and patron support could be strained because of the economic downturn related to COVID-19, are there additional plans to open up new support and new funding opportunities for these vital community organizations?
Yes, there is some help for nonprofits. I heard a lot from the nonprofits in the process of putting together the legislation. We actually had a statewide conference call a few days before the negotiations began. That was very helpful to me because I got a good sense of what was happening and how we could be helpful. One of the issues is just the fact that there are fewer resources out there from the corporate community and others, individuals. People are nervous about the stock market going down and so on. And second, of course, is that the need is greater than ever. Think of our food banks as an example, which are being used much more frequently now that you don't have the school lunch program, you don't have other entities that are involved at the school or at the workplace, and people are looking for help. So 3 things I would say. 1, nonprofits, for the most part, are able to engage in this SBA program. Initially, they weren't part of it. Some of us push hard for that. They are now included in it for the most part. I think the exception is if they take Medicaid funding, they're not. But think of your typical nonprofit, again, someone who is a food pantry in the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio, in the Miami Valley. That pantry probably would be able to qualify. So that's one. Nonprofits do qualify for these SBA loans we talked about. And I encourage them to talk to whoever they do their banking work about that right away. But the other thing is that charitable contributions are encouraged through this legislation. It hasn't gotten much play, but there's a new above the line deduction of $300 per person. For our churches, which is one reason this is in here, our other places of worship, synagogues, temples, and so on. This is very important. So individuals can get an above the line deduction to be able to help, even if they take the standard deduction. So this is unusual. Normally you take the standard deduction, you can't get an itemized deduction or another deduction. This is above the line, $300. In addition to that, for people who itemize, there are higher limits as to what you can give as a charitable contribution and get a full deduction on, which is also going to be helpful for a lot of people who have the means to be able to make a larger contribution. And then finally, for our corporations, we also increase the amount that corporations can give and get a deduction on. So for the companies that are continuing to work, including our defense contractors who want to be more helpful with our nonprofits, I would encourage them to do that because they're actually going to get a larger deduction for that, and that's appropriate during these tough times. I will say that there are a lot of great charities doing good work all around the state of Ohio. I have decided not to take my take-home pay, my salary for the next 2 months, and to give it to 5 different organizations around the state that are involved in every one of our regions of Ohio. So as an example, in Cincinnati, our foundation and our local United Way are combining with a COVID-19 fund that's going to help all other nonprofits in the Southwest Ohio area. That should be helpful to some Dayton nonprofits as well. So that's one of the 5 that I chose to make a contribution to. So if you have the means to do it, and not everybody does right now, and I get that, but if you don't have the ability to help out in terms of a charitable contribution, maybe you can do something else. Maybe do some volunteer activity, even working the phone for some of these organizations. I know at the food banks, they're looking for people who are healthy, who will, take proper precautions, social distancing, wear a mask and so on, but can help in food distribution. So there are other ways to help. You can give blood. I went to the Dayton Community Blood Center last week when I got in from DC, and I gave blood there. And they need it because the donations are down. They can't do the normal blood drives they would do at the high schools or at the colleges. And they're being very safe as to how they do it. So I know there's a lot of pain out there on some very sad stories. I've talked to some small business owners who started their own business, 30, 40 years ago, and are now seeing the prospect of having to shut their doors and wondering whether they can ever get back on their feet. I would say that I believe once we get the healthcare crisis under control here, which is where a lot of my focus is now, we will be able to get this economy back up and going. We've got to have better measurements, better metrics to know when we're making progress on healthcare. And I think that's the number of new infections every day. And when we have that and it's credible and people feel comfortable in sending their kids back to school, comfortable in going back to a restaurant, comfortable in going back to work, I think this economy is poised to really take off. But what we're doing in this legislation to help small employers keep as many employees as they can and keep their doors open will be essential to the ability for a robust recovery. We don't want people to have to go back out and find new people and train them up. We want people to be able to go right back to their business and get things moving again. And I hope by this summer we'll see that. So we can't give up hope here. I think it's going to be tough here for certainly the next several weeks. But then I do believe we'll come back and come back strong. Recall our economy was hitting on all cylinders. We had just finished in February the 19th straight month of wage increases of over 3% on average. We had GDP growth. We had the ability for people to find a job if they wanted a job. More jobs were being offered than there were jobs being looked for by unemployed Americans. So things were going pretty darn well. We can get back to that if we all pull together and get through this crisis as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. We all want to get back there as quick as we can and keep people as healthy as we can. And through your leadership, you're obviously leading by example. And we appreciate all that you're doing to try to help out the business community and our nonprofits and our defense contractors. Senator, as we're looking to wrap things up, just had a last question for you. As you're looking forward, what else still needs to be done for the business community? Is there still additional support that needs to happen? And are you guys looking at a future package to continue to support the business community? And I ask this because all of the impact may not be known yet. Things are still occurring. We have not defeated the COVID-19 yet. Hope to soon, but it has not been defeated yet. So what else will need to be done to help support the business community?
Well, Chris, as I said, this package, $1.2 trillion, is unprecedented. You mentioned that at the outset. Is it perfect? No. And it's not perfect because we didn't have perfect information. We had enough information to know that there was going to be a deep economic decline, that in effect our small business economy was going to go into free fall, depending on what sector of the economy that you're in. But for most businesses, we knew this was going to be really tough. So we did do something that is unprecedented in terms of the funding available. I mentioned some of that. Other parts of it we didn't get a chance to talk about, but including the direct payments, the unemployment insurance bump up, which is at historic levels. So there is an opportunity to now see how this works. And I don't think we should go ahead with a new piece of legislation until we see how the existing pieces work. There will be gaps, and those gaps will need to be covered, in my view. My hope is that the fourth phase of this, remember this was the third piece of legislation, first one mostly on healthcare, second one a lot on testing, and also being sure that we're helping our hospitals. Now we have this one that focuses more on the economy as well as healthcare. The next one, the fourth one, I hope will be focused in part on stimulus. In other words, really trying to get the economy moving, because I hope by then we will begin to have seen progress on the healthcare front. And once we do, once we flatten the curve, as we hear Dr. Acton, our state health director, talk about, then we'll be able to hopefully get some of these businesses that are on the cusp to be able to get back into business and give them the encouragement and the help to do that. So I hope it will be more of a stimulus package. For instance, some more tax relief. One thing I didn't mention in our little conversation was the fact that immediately people are seeing relief right now and not having to pay their payroll taxes. So employers' payroll tax holiday for this year, that deferral is in place. Employers can immediately not have to use their net operating losses going forward, but can monetize them by taking them back 5 years. So immediately employers can take a bigger deduction when they borrow money on the interest on that loan. So there are some things in the bill already that help in terms of the economics of this for businesses. That might be something we need to look at again. How do you really stimulate economic growth once we're through the worst of this crisis?
That's a really good point, and we appreciate you looking forward at what else can be done as well. Your office and you personally have always been very open to the greater Dayton business community and us bringing you those suggestions and ideas. So we'll continue to do that as the real impact of this is realized, so that as you guys are formulating phase 4, you can have that input from our business community.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. And I said earlier, you guys keep us on our toes. You keep us informed as to what's going on in the community. I love the fly-ins. I love the opportunity to visit with your members. So keep it up. We need the information now. What's working, what's not working. We got to be sure this bill we've got right now is properly implemented. We spend a lot of time putting together legislation and sometimes not enough time on implementing it properly. Let's do that. And then let's see where the gaps are and pull together and get through this thing together. If we do, I believe our best days are still ahead of us, but we've got to get through this healthcare crisis before we can deal with the economic crisis we face.
Sure. Well, Senator, I think you summarized it well when you said we have to have hope, and all of us have to have hope, whether we're in the business community, whether we're an employee, whether we're an elected official. Hope is the key here, and let's keep working towards that hope and the greater good of society. And I know we'll get there soon and our economy will rebound. We thank you for your time today. You've made yourself available, and we truly appreciate your outreach directly to the business community in the greater Dayton area through this video. We've been doing these videos as a way to get the message out to the business community while also practicing and doing our responsibility for proper social distancing. So thanks for doing this with us, and we appreciate having you today.
Great. Thank you, Chris.